I want my colleagues to understand the nature of language, the fact that it is an enigma, the fact that it is a common phenomena that is enigmatic. You have the right to experiment. Language is an incredible phenomenon, and of nature, it invites us to experiment in the classroom. You're working in an arena that allows you extraordinary latitude in what you can do with and for kids.
Hi, I'm Nora Jones. Welcome to It's About Language. This podcast connects language and culture to life, learning, and hope. You'll experience insightful conversations with creative leaders in the fields of education, business, arts, and science. My guests shed light on the impact of language and culture on individuals and society as they share their stories and experiences. You'll be informed and inspired as we explore how language and culture make us human and bring hope in the midst of a challenging world. And it is my great pleasure to welcome my friend John. We're going to continue our conversation, but here, finally, I'm going to turn on the record button for the podcast. John De Mado. John, welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Nora. I'm absolutely tickled that you would invite me to spend a half an hour with you.
Well, I'm just delighted because it's always so interesting. We have the most interesting conversations. And, one of the things that I would like to do is say we've been talking again about linguistics and Uber.
Yep, that's correct.
Tell us about that combination, John, because I don't know if linguistics and Uber is how everybody would start out thinking about language acquisition and use.
Well, I can tell you, about a half a year ago, I decided to try something different. I've been toying with the idea of driving for Uber for a while. And so for half a year, I actually have been. And what's interesting to me is being in the car and being able to speak not only English, but Spanish, French, and Italian with people. It is, if there's anyone out there that would like to improve their second, third, or fourth language, um, and either don't have the time, the inclination, or the cash to travel abroad, I might suggest to you that you get a job with Uber, drive your car, get paid, and improve your language. It's really a wonderful thing.
And how does it come about, John? What happens? Give a story?
Well, I got plenty of stories. I mean, generally speaking, what's so interesting to me is that I live in Southwest Florida, and of course, um, the Latino population here is substantial. And so, uh, periodically, I get a request for a ride, and I will pick up someone that will get in the car. And if the person speaks English, you can pretty much discern where they're from based on whatever regional accent they have. But in many cases, you'll find that you get people that'll get in the car and they're silent. And so my best gauge, looking at their facial structure, whatever it might be, is that perhaps the person is Hispanic. And so there's kind of silence in the car for perhaps 4 or 5 minutes, and then I say something in Spanish, and they light up like a Christmas tree. And the first thing they say to me in Spanish is, "You speak Spanish?" And I said, "Yes, I do, as a matter of fact." And then all of a sudden, the whole tenor of the trip changes. And they're so tickled by the fact that somebody who doesn't appear to be Hispanic in any way, shape, or form, who is a native English speaker, can speak their language. It's a lovely thing, and it's like I've always said, you know uh, language is the key to the culture. I mean, without the language, then all else is just travelogue. But you really get to know people and what they're about when you can at least engage them to some level with their in their language. The interesting part too is the fact that I get a chance to counsel them for those people that would like to speak English, but they're intimidated, etc., whatever it might be. I give them all kinds of advice on how it is that I speak Spanish and French and Italian. So it's kind of like street creds because I know what it's like to be on the other end of the stick. I understand what it's like to be at the linguistic deficit with the native speaker. and they really appreciate that. And then they're also very supportive of me, which is wonderful. I mean, I am not a native speaker in any way, shape, or form, and so it bolsters my confidence every time I get a chance, opportunity to interact this way with people in the car. So it's a good thing.
That's really cool, John. And again, there's so many of the podcasts have talked about the nature of identity, and here the person, as you say, light up like a Christmas tree, and then can get engaged and are sharing and and welcoming back to you. That's a powerful statement about the nature of how language does that. You also talked about acquiring language through that, recommending people might try it. And what we're talking about here today is strongly focused on how is language acquired? What is its very nature? And you have some interesting questions that are put out to people about, is it primarily imitated, which is strongly how we provide instruction right now in language,
Mm-hmm.
but do we actually self-select? Can you talk a little bit then about, take it, you're always driving us from one thing to another. That's part of your skill set with your
As long as I'm not
workshops.
driving you crazy.
That's right. Well, that too, but no, no, no. The workshops and the keynotes that you do, always integrate these concepts. So where is this continuum
Well,
of imitation, self-selection?
yeah. Let me just start off by saying that I, for many, many years now, I fancy myself as being an applied linguist, and an applied linguist is someone who is devoted to the study of how the human mind creates and acquires language. Um, and of course, for anyone that is actually trying to transmit language to students, this is obviously an arena that is of ultimate importance. Um, so that's the first point I'd like to make before I launch into your question. Um, the thing we need to know about language in general is that there are no experts. I certainly don't posit myself as one, and I would be bold enough to say that there are no experts. And there's a very succinct reason for this. Language is a common phenomenon. It comes to virtually everyone, except for people that have certain deficits and most of those can be overcome. Um, but in some cases, there are physical handicaps that block language entirely. But generally speaking,
Mhm.
when we think about language, we expect it to come. Yet the interesting point about it is that language is very enigmatic because it is precisely because it is so phenomenal, because it is so common that in fact we know very little about it. And a
Uh-huh.
lot of what we do know is hypothesis.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just start by saying that I'm not coming to you as an expert on this, but rather what I'm trying to do here is to develop a conversation within the profession about a point that I think is pivotal to success in the classroom and to helping kids acquire a second language. Um, I was impacted a number of years back by Steven Pinker, who is a professor at MIT and used to be a colleague of Noam Chomsky's. And he's a cognitive psychologist. And in reading his book, The Language Instinct, he mentions somewhere in there the notion that language is self selected. And for the life of me, I did not understand that.
Interesting.
And so I did some research and I reflected on it a great deal. And I've come to understand what he means by that. And I would say this. I would say that there are several commonly held language acquisition beliefs and practices, or if you would, techniques that have been in place forever and ever, not only in the United States, but around the world. Certain beliefs and practices, and those beliefs, first of all, seems to be an embedded belief that language is imitated.
Okay.
Okay,
Okay.
that babies, when children come into this world, that basically there's a silent period and then we talk and they imitate us. We also seem to have a healthy belief that language can be transmitted through memorization. And I'd like to address both of those points. And let's start with imitation.
Okay.
Um, and I'm going to start with this statement that because there are aspects of language that are imitated, and I'll tell you, for example, intonation. Anyone that's listening to me right now probably has me pegged as someone from the New York metropolitan area because of the way I use my language, the intonations that I use, my pronunciation. Okay.
Yeah.
Clearly, we have regional accents that we use. So intonation, phonology, and body language are all things that are imitated.
Okay.
Um, uh, and a lot of times, body language, the different uses of body language, come from our cultural groups. Many of my mannerisms are borrowed from my grandfather, my father, my mother, my grandmother, my uncles, my large Italian family. Many of my body language attempts and my hand gestures and so forth are directly related to my cultural group. Um, the phonology, if you would, my pronunciation is definitely related to, and it's an imitation of where I grew up.
Okay.
In tonal patterns, for example, I've noticed of late that younger people use upspeak, and upspeak, if you want to look it up on online, is basically the let me put it this way. Growing up, I always thought that if you ask a question, the intonation goes up. And if you respond to the question, in other words, you make a declarative sentence, the intonation goes down.
Yeah.
I noticed that a lot of young people today, the intonal pattern goes up continually, whether it's a declarative sentence or a question. So, in the end result, everything sounds like a question to me. These are all imitated things. It's very important to remember that one of the primary things about language is that it identifies you as a member of a group.
Yeah.
And so, um, things like intonation, body language, and accent, regional accent, are imitated and largely link you with the group. So, what I'm saying in a long winded fashion is that, yes, there are aspects of language that are imitated, but, and that's a big word, that does not necessarily imply that all aspects of language are imitated.
Okay.
The second point is memorization, and I can just very directly say memorization is largely asking children to memorize language is largely inadequate, as the need for language production is instantaneous. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that it's very nice that a person can recite a poem in French or in Spanish or in Chinese, whatever it might be. But unless the context requires the recitation of that poem, then that poem in and of itself is worthless as a communicative tool. Basically, we need to be helping children to acquire language so that they can pivot on the spot based on the situation in which they find themselves.
Ah.
So, again, imitation and memorization are practices that have been held for a long time, instructional practices and beliefs about how language is acquired. I would suggest to you that language is primarily self-selected. And I believe this is what Dr. Pinker is implying, that language is acquired in the crucible of situation and problem solving.
Okay.
I would be so bold even as to say that as individuals, we do not have one single word inside of us that we did not choose ourselves.
What an
And
interesting statement, John. Say that again, please.
that as individuals, We do not have one word inside of us that we did not choose or select ourselves. And again, let's stop and think about this. If you believe, as I do, that language is acquired in the crucible of situation and problem solving, because quite frankly, that is what language is about. Language is a problem solving device because human existence is problematized from the time that you open your eyes up in the morning. We are making, we are resolving problems, some of them being small, like what should I have for breakfast or what should I wear today, to perhaps more serious or larger problems. Um, and so language is acquired in the crucible of problem solving a situation. And what we do is we acquire a language as we need it, as we encounter problems, as we encounter a situation. Um, what we do is we we aggressively select the words we need to navigate that problem or that situation. Providing people with vocabulary that they don't need is a waste of time. In other words, commonly in a language class, we'll teach kids weather expressions. So if you have a child in Wyoming, why should they know, oh my God, it's a tsunami? Or you might say, well, that child may move to Indonesia someday. Well, okay. When they encounter the tsunami, they will learn to say, oh my God, it's a tsunami. But while they're living in Wyoming, they really don't need to know that. And so I just go back to the fact that that language, the language we own, is highly personal, and it is aggressively selected by the human, by the individual, her or himself. I'd like to share a story with you that contains a very mild expletive that I have to use in order to give you the full value of this story.
We
So,
are
uh,
forewarned, John. We are
okay, and
forewarned.
a mild apology, but I don't think anyone will be offended by it. And this is a true story that supports the notion of self selection. I was in an Italian restaurant having dinner. I was out on business and I was having dinner by myself. And seated next to me was a table of 7 adults and one 3 year old boy. And so it was a very nice Italian restaurant. Everyone was having quiet dinner conversations and drinking wine, and it's just lovely. And this little boy was sitting in his bolster seat and clearly did not want to be there. So, as I was sitting very close to that table, I was watching the boy just because I really had nothing else to do. I was by myself. And watching this little boy was like watching Mount St. Helen. In other words, what I'm trying to share with you is that I could tell from his antsiness in the seat that the question at hand was, will there be an eruption? The question at hand is, when will the eruption occur? Well, the eruption occurred 1 hour and 15 minutes later. Of course, everyone was still just having hors d'oeuvres and their glasses of wine, and the little boy had his obligatory hamburger and Coca-Cola, and followed by ice cream. So the child was on a sugar high to start with.
Mm.
At the hour and 15-minute mark, the little boy raised his hands, his little pudgy arms and hands, as high as he could over his head, reaching to the ceiling, and out loud he yells, "Let's get the hell out of here."
Oh,
Yeah, at which point the restaurant fell into complete silence.
I bet.
Everyone looked at the little boy. The little boy slid down in his bolster seat because he was having an moment.
Mm.
And there was this pause. And during this pause, the mother of the child shot a glance across the table to the father of the child.
I bet.
It was a glare of such enormity that if this glare it would have made this man particles in the ionosphere. And I knew there were no words shared, but I knew what the woman was thinking. The woman was thinking, you see, don't I tell you not to talk that way in front of the baby? Do you see the way he imitates you?
Yeah.
Now, I would, I would take issue with that thought, and I would say that no, the child was not imitating his father. In other words, let me put it this way: did the father say it? Of course he did. And was the child there when the father said it? Yes, he was. But to assume that children are drive-by victims of language is ridiculous. Little kids are aggressive acquirers of language, and they're always on the lookout for language that they think is powerful and that can help
Interesting.
them express certain emotions. Now, I am certain that probably what happened was when the father said this, he probably had some fire in his eyes. And I would imagine there probably were some gestures that went along with it. And he probably raised his voice. And the child, of course, was seeing this and said, I like that. I'd be filing that for future reference. And that's what the child did. The child selected that language and added it to his repertoire. The reason I know it wasn't imitated was because it took the child 1 hour and 15 minutes to deploy.
Interesting.
All right. Now, clearly, age inappropriate, but devastatingly proficient.
Yes.
And I mean proficient in the terms that we use it. In other words, it was situationally appropriate. It was age inappropriate. I also know it wasn't imitated because the child just didn't say it in a kind of absent-mindedly. The child waited until the situation was intolerable and then deployed a formula of language that he knew fit that situation.
So it
That is self-selection.
fit
That
that
is not imitation.
specific situation, deployed it to fit the situation, and it was effective. It stopped everything.
Absolutely. It was, as I say, devastatingly proficient, age inappropriate. I'm not, and I don't want to think that I am, supporting the children swear in any way, shape, or form. I will even say this to you because I've had this discussion with a number of parents, in that I believe that you could use expletives all day long around children, um, but not, in other words, if you were to deliver those expletives in, not that you should, but if they were done in a monotone voice with no gestures and with absolutely no emotional reaction whatsoever, I would be willing to bet that children would ignore those. It is all in the delivery.
It's probably not an identity to that word, right? The way
Exactly.
you've described it.
Exactly. Children aggressively select language. And it's not just children. We all do, even as adults. And I will give you another anecdote, and we'll go from there. Um, I have had cancer twice in the course of my life, and I am fine. Thank you very much. Um, and when I first was notified that I had cancer, I had virtually no oncological vocabulary whatsoever. Didn't need to. No one in my family was affected by it, and hard to believe in my circle of friends. No one. So I had the rudimentary words such as radiation and chemotherapy. Um, you ought to see me talk about cancer now,
Interesting.
and you should see how extensive my oncological vocabulary is. How did that happen? Does anyone think that I walked into my physician or my cancer doctor, and the first thing he did was to hand me a list of oncological terms, and he said to me, "Here are the words, John. I want you to go home And so at that point, I said, these are the words I need to know. Should I memorize them?
Yeah.
And he said, you bet your life. No pun intended. That's not the way it came down at all. Basically, I selected these words because I needed to uh, communicate effectively with the individual, the doctor, and the doctors that held my life in the palm of their hands. And so I think it's important to recognize, again, these are just two anecdotes, one funny, one personal, that we are, as human beings, we are aggressive selectors, if you would, of of language, of the vocabulary. We again, there is not one word we have inside of us that we haven't chosen. This has great import for how we approach our classrooms.
It sure does.
Now, I'm going to couch this in the subjunctive. If this were true, okay,
Okay.
possibility, because as I said to you before, language is a riddle jammed into a puzzle, wrapped up in an enigma. And so I'm not using the indicative mood here. I'm using the subjunctive for a reason because I am hypothesizing. If this were true, how would this impact our classrooms? Uh, Reason being, Nora, um, that language does not abide disrespect. Um, we either we either work to understand its nature to the greatest degree possible and create environments in our classrooms that respect the nature of language, or language will defy us at every turn.
Interesting.
And with all due respect to my colleagues, me being a language teacher myself, we have taught modern language in the United States for well over 150 years, and the track record hasn't been that good. There are too many adults that in the car driving for Uber. I hear it all the time. They look at my profile and they say, my, oh my, you speak four languages. I had 3 years of such and such language and I can't speak a word. I hear it continually.
Happens a lot. Yeah.
And, yeah. And so I think it's important that if this were true, we need to stop, think hard about this, and reflect on at least once in a while how we might bring the self-selection process into the language classroom. Um, for example, if we were to say, how would this impact the classroom? I think perhaps what we should think about is at the beginning of the school year, first and foremost, inventory the students about their, and I realize everyone's generally speaking got a textbook program, and I understand the realities of that and what needs to be done and so forth. But it doesn't mean that periodically we can't do extraordinary things that are more symbiotic, if you would, with the nature of language, such as creating activities that require self-selection of language. At the beginning of the year, inventory the kids about what their interests are, what their hobbies are, what their preferences are. Um, and then you could, for example, use personally selected items to tell in a story. In other words, what are you interested in? What are your hobbies? What are your preferences? There's one activity in particular, Nora, that I like to do.
Okay.
And this, I hope, this is, I mean, there's a million activities, and the activity I'm about to describe is not one that you have to do every day. I'm not telling you to throw your textbook out. I understand your textbook has vocabulary that has been pre-selected and so forth. I'm talking about you, the teacher, stopping and doing something outside the textbook, perhaps once a week, that shows respect for the self-selection process. Most every child has a computer or a mobile phone, and in those devices are normally millions of pictures that they have taken or downloaded into their computer. Let's say, for example, a child is really interested in fashion, or a child is really interested in cars, whatever it might be. And it makes no difference. Everyone doesn't have to do the same thing. That's the whole point, is that it's about self-selection. So they go into their pictures, and let's say they select pictures of people with different type of clothing styles, okay, friends
Okay.
and so forth,
Okay.
okay, and lay them out on a storyboard. And then photos also allows you to add background music. And then each one of the pictures on the storyboard you can set with a timer. It starts at 3 seconds, and you can, depending on how long the student wants to talk about that given picture, right? You can move it up to 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 19 seconds, whatever you want. It can be up to a minute.
Okay.
So, what I'm saying is that the student actually creates a presentation to show in class, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Can be shown through the computer on an LCD on a large screen. And they get up and they talk about something that they're actually interested in. And how do they get the vocabulary? They look it up. They talk to native speakers.
Uh-huh.
They ask the teacher, how would I say this, miss? And will there be errors? Of course there will be. But the point is that it gives the kids a chance to actually talk about and present something that they are really truly interested in, and they've worked for the vocabulary, which leads to ownership of vocabulary. That's a very important term. The beginning of language is when you sense that you own some language, not the textbook's language per se, but personal language that
Mm-hmm.
you have worked for, not memorized, but you actually worked for because you want to talk about something that impassions you to someone else. And so this entire notion of self-selection is again something that we in our profession need to seriously start to have a conversation about. Um,
Definitely do. And John, the question I have for you is this concept that you've described so beautifully. And by the way, I'm loving the phrase that you used earlier. We're not victims of drive-by language. That that example that you provided was really about a student taking control of, as you say, of the situation in which they found themselves. You have the book that you uh, published in 2018, In Search of Language, about enhancing language acquisition in the classroom. Some of these ideas and others for application for educators are in that material, are they not?
they are. They are. This, as a matter of fact, this very concept is treated within the book and in the broader distinction between uh, teaching for mastery or encouraging proficiency in the classroom. That's the whole thrust of the book, is to
Mm,
make a very once and for all a succinct distinction between what we have been doing historically, which is teaching for mastery, and what we've been encouraged to do, if you would, um, since the 1990s, is to help kids acquire a language or encourage proficiency in the classroom. And so that is the actual thrust of that book. It's a short read, um, uh, 90 some odd pages, but it's the points are bulleted and the chapters are short for a specific reason. I want people to be able to read, enjoy, and reread as many times as they want.
thank you, John, and I'd gladly put it up on my website so I know that folks can follow that trail. And I know that a phrase that I'm keeping inside myself that I hope that listeners keep inside themselves. Well, there's many wonderful sentences from you, but here's another phrase that I know that you've used. We have no word inside ourselves that we have not chosen. And that can be a powerful transformation for me, and invite others to think about that. What would you leave as a final thought for our listeners today?
Um, I would, that's an interesting question. I would like, if I could do anything, I would like to be a catalyst or source for language teachers to encourage them to take risks in the classroom. Um, I want you to understand, I want my colleagues to understand the nature of language, the fact that it is an enigma, the fact that it is a common phenomena that is enigmatic. You have the right to experiment. Um, language, language is an incredible phenomenon, um, and of nature, it it invites us to experiment in the classroom, and that means to, yes, I understand, work with your textbook program, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with experimenting with new thought, trying new things in the classroom. Um, and to keep in mind that, as I said before, the nature of language is such that it will defy us if we do not show it its due respect, if we instruct in manners that do not support language acquisition. Um, so I guess that's what it would be. I would like to encourage my colleagues. You're working in an arena that allows you extraordinary latitude in what you can do with and for kids, particularly because language in and of itself is not all that circumscribed. It is enigmatic. Therefore, you can do so many things ranging from art to drama to whatever it is you want to do in the classroom. But bear in mind that language is self-selected. And so I guess that is probably the last message that I would like to send to you during this interview.
Thank you so much, John. And that sense of language is alive, enter into it being alive, and that the alive that you bring, that living passion that you bring in all you do, in all of the things that you do for teachers with the workshops, keynotes, sessions, the book. Thank you, John, for sharing that liveliness and that insight. And I look forward to future conversations.
Well, Nora, I also would like to thank you. I want to thank you for your contributions to the profession. Over the course of the years, you have supported language acquisition in just about every capacity you could, ranging from heading up your language organization to publishing books that help people acquire language, and now with your new endeavor with this podcast. Um, it's just wonderful what you're doing, and I'm honored to have been tapped as a guest on your program.
Oh, thank you so much, John. How kind. And I appreciate all the sharing that you've done. Celebrate your freedom from cancer. Thank you for sharing that story as well. And again, as I say, I look forward to the next time we have a chance to have a conversation.
Thank you, Nora.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Let's continue the conversation. Be sure to check out my website, fluencyonline.com, to learn more about our guests and to check out the resources and information they've shared with us there. I have other ideas, resources, and opportunities there for you too. Again, thanks so much for listening, and until next time,